Please welcome to the stage Amy Sinacola.
Thank you. Do you remember what you wanted to be when you grew up? Maybe you wanted to be a superhero, like Batman, Spider-Man, or Wonder Woman even. I know I watch my two little girls now, dressed in long blue dress, firing ice out of their hands, pretending to be Elsa, the cool ice queen with superpowers, or Anna, the strong, fiery and determined sister. And the reason I ask you this is because I'm going to spend the next 10 minutes or so talking about how what we knew and what we played when we were little might have something that we can learn from now. And how this idea of being a superhero never really leaves us. And this can be both a good and a bad thing. But before I do that, let me introduce myself. My name's Amy Sinacola, and I'm a women's wellbeing and success coach. And the reason I want to talk about this today is because recently I discovered in an old dusty box in my mum's garage a school book from when I was 7 years old. And in this book I had written, "My name is Amy, I have brown hair, brown shoes, and when I grow up I want to be a nurse and a horse racer so that I can look after people and people will clap and cheer for me." So what happened to that little girl and her 7-year-old dreams? Well, I can tell you that I didn't achieve my dream of being a horse racer. In fact, I wasn't even very good at horse riding. And after a nasty accident and a close shave with a wheelchair, I hung up my riding hat for good. But if we fast forward 15 years later to that little girl, age 22, proudly graduating with a degree in nursing and her first big proper scary job on a busy medical ward in Oxford. And when I think back to that 7-year-old girl, what I find really interesting and fascinating is that she seemed to know something about the very nature of herself that knew she would fit well in a caring profession such as nursing. And it's true, I was the kind of little girl who would try and fix and mend any injured animal. I would spend hours talking to the sheep in the field behind my parents' house. We lived in the country, there wasn't much to do. And I would eat every last cereal in my bowl, not because I'd been told to, but because I felt sorry for the ones left that they weren't with their friends in my tummy. Might go some way to explaining even why now I struggle to leave food on my plate. And I don't really know if it was because I was just born like that, or if it was a product of that 1970s stereotype that I grew up with. Women's lib hadn't quite reached the sleepy part of the world where I grew up. But what I do know is that when I was little, I seemed to know something about the very nature of myself, that I had enough empathy, care and compassion that I could even feel sorry for the last Cheerio in the bowl. And so it was when I came to that first big, proper, scary nursing job. I went into that job with all the empathy, care and compassion I could muster, and with all the gusto of that little girl. And I loved that job. I loved getting to meet all the interesting people. I loved seeing all the gruesome and gory things. I went from being on a medical ward to working in intensive care, to eventually working in cancer care for many, many years. And I had opportunities where I got to travel the world and nurse in different countries. But the thing I enjoyed most of all was the privilege I had of being able to make an impact and make a difference on people's lives when they were going through the toughest and darkest of times. And I know that I am part of their story, just as they are part of mine and have shaped who I am now. But what I didn't know was that after years of showing care, compassion and empathy, and witnessing human suffering and distress without ever really taking time to process it or taking time to look after myself, I was heading down the road to exhaustion, burnout and compassion fatigue. And it's funny, isn't it, that very thing that made me a good nurse, that compassion, it has a name for when it gets a bit tired. But what's not funny is compassion fatigue is a form of secondary post-traumatic stress. And there's much I know now that I didn't know then that could have helped me. Because you see, what I was good at was hiding how I felt. Hiding what was really going on. I was really good at hiding how tired I was, so much so that on a Saturday I could barely get up to play with my little girl who hadn't seen me all week. I was really good at hiding from everyone else how snappy and irritable I could be. Only my husband would be the one who knew about that. And I was really good at hiding the fact that some days I would have to stop the car on my way to work and break down in tears at the thought of all the patients and families and their suffering, distress and heartache. I felt like I was living a lie. What people saw wasn't what I was feeling. Have you ever had a time like that? When you feel like you just have to carry on regardless for the sake of everyone else, and you can't really let on how you really feel. Because the thing was, I was trying to be a superhero in my own life. Take on all the challenges that came my way. Never break under the pressure of it. And never ask for help. And I know that it wasn't just me expecting me to be a superhero. Other people expected it of me too. I was the go-to person. Patients would call me an angel, call me amazing, tell me what a hero I was. And I would wince sometimes at the difference between that image and the reality of my life. You know, they hadn't seen me dancing after one too many vodkas the weekend before. Because here's the thing, even though I was trying to be a superhero, and even though other people saw me perhaps as a superhero, just as people see NHS workers now, I didn't really feel like a superhero. Because if you've ever failed to resuscitate a 12-year-old from a cardiac arrest, or sat and wept with a young woman as she faced the fact that she would never see her children grow up, or made a silly mistake, like put an enema up an old lady's vagina, much to her surprise, you don't feel like a superhero. Because you see, superheroes aren't allowed to make mistakes, are they? They're not allowed to show vulnerability, weakness, or just show up for who they really are. So no, I didn't feel like a superhero. And I didn't want to put on big pants and take on the world. I just wanted to be a nurse. I just wanted to do my job. But here's the thing, I always wanted to do it better. I never felt like I was good enough, and I never felt like I could do enough. Because by this time, I'd forgotten all those strengths of care and compassion and empathy that were unique to me. And I just felt like I was no different or special to anyone else. Learnt to brush off praise. Learnt not to think too much of myself. Do you do that? Ignore when people say good things to you, but take on the criticisms to heart. Because that's what we do, isn't it? We learn how to be our worst critics. We judge ourselves, we look for problems, we look for weaknesses, and it's not our fault. It's the way our brains are wired. It's something called negativity bias. It's a survival instinct. We look for our weaknesses, we look for problems in ourselves and in others. But in doing so, we operate from a state of fear and threat. And it's also the systems that we work in, that we grow up in, well-meaning teachers, parents, managers, school, workplaces, that always encourage us to look for what we can improve on and what we can do better at. Now, I don't know about you, and if you've ever had an appraisal where you've had to do a SWOT analysis. So if you don't know what this is, let me explain it to you. It's where you have to think about yourself and your work and identify your strengths, the opportunities available to you, your weaknesses and your threats. And if you've ever had to do this exercise, you can remember how hard it can sometimes feel to think of those strengths and those opportunities, and yet how easy it feels to think of the weaknesses and the threats. And what's crazy is that even when we do think of those strengths and opportunities, we don't then spend the next half hour with our manager looking at how we can make the most of those opportunities and use our strengths to show up for how brilliant we are. No. We spend the next half an hour looking at what our weaknesses are, what we need to do better, and what are the challenges coming in to threaten us. And it's interesting, I did this exercise with a group of nurses, about 40 nurses, and I gave them their SWOT chart and asked them to fill it out and have a discussion about it. And the strengths and the opportunity boxes were almost blank, maybe 1, 2 things written in. But the weaknesses and the threats, well, there wasn't enough paper for all of that. And that's what all the discussion was about. Because that's what we're used to doing. We're not used to looking out for our strengths and our opportunities. And it was the same in my own appraisals. It would come up time and time again. Efficiency, organisation, time management. That's what I needed to improve on. But you see, what me, Norma Manager, really realised was that with my strengths of compassion and empathy dialed up to 10, things like efficiency, organisation and timekeeping were never going to be my strong points. So of course, it was just a matter of time before that system would take all that it had to offer. Eventually broke me. But the good news is, I did manage to find a way through. I realised that if I needed to make changes, it was only down to me. I don't know if you've heard that phrase, if you don't change, nothing else will. And that really sunk into me. I realised it was time to stop blaming the system, blaming the managers, blaming anything else and feeling like a victim. And it was time to start taking responsibility to create the life that I wanted and make the changes that were needed. And it was during this discovery that I came across coaching. And I found coaching was a real life jacket for me. It helped shift perspectives. It helped me see how my thoughts and my values and my beliefs could shape my actions and my behaviours and could have an impact not only on how I felt, but on how my family felt and how the patients I was serving helped and how the nurses that I managed felt. And it was through coaching that I learned I had other strengths I could use, like leadership and creativity. And I could use these strengths to help fall in love with nursing again and feel positive and resilient about all the challenges that it could throw at me. And so this is what I do today. I've now retrained as a coach. I've even got a certificate from university, proper one. We all like a certificate. Hands up who likes a certificate. And I've been a featured coach for Psychologies Magazine. I'm accredited with the International Coaching Federation. And I've taught undergraduate nurses and postgraduate nurses around issues such as compassion fatigue, resilience and coaching. And I've since had hundreds of clients come to me feeling under immense pressure and always feeling like they're not good enough. These clients, they're trying to be the superhero in their own lives and then feeling like a failure when they realise they can't, just like I used to. And one of the things I do with these clients is that I help them work out their strengths. Because here's the thing, you don't see Superman deciding one day that he's not going to fly to the rescue of the crashing train. He's going to try a different style because it's come up in his SWOT analysis that he's not very good at it and he needs to perfect it or practice it a bit more. No, he uses what he's good at to do what he needs to do. He focuses his time, energy and attention on using his strengths to get the job done. So focusing on our strengths is really important, except we find it really hard to recognise them, just like those nurses did. And that's what I find with my clients too. They struggle to identify what their strengths are. And it's so important because once you realise what your strengths are, it can have so much more impact in the world, so much more confidence, so much more success, and so much more joy. So working with strengths with my clients is key to being able to shift into a state of being able to say no to the things they don't want to do, yes to the things they do want to do, and know how to dial up these strengths and use them to face the challenges that life throws at them. This is only one part of what I do with these people. Because what I've noticed is that even though these people come with different experiences and different stories to tell, there's really only 4 key stages that are needed to help shift them into feeling much more capable, resilient and positive. And the first step is by working out what the blueprint is. What is their plan? What is their vision? What changes do they need to make in their lives? And what makes them tick? And then once they've worked out that, they know what they need to apply their strengths to. And the next step, of course, is then looking at their brilliance, which is where we dig into those strengths, help them work out what they are. And the next step is to look at blocks. Now, I like to think of our blocks as like a traffic jam. They get in the way of our destination, and if you let it, they can cause a great deal of irritation, stress and anxiety. And blocks can be many different things, and I work with my clients to help them work out what their blocks are. But here is the thing. The majority of the time, the biggest block of all is you. And it might be that you're striving for perfection, or it might be that you are your biggest judge, self-critical, never feeling good enough. Or it might be like me, you always want to run to the rescue and work hard to please everyone else, but forgetting how to look after yourself in the process. So once we know what these blocks are, we can work with them. I'm not saying you can get rid of them, but once you're aware of them, you know how to make choices to get to where you want to be and get around those blocks. And finally, it's about creating some balance. Now, I don't know if you've ever watched Frozen. I mean, I certainly have, only about 500 times. And I don't want to spoil the story for you if you haven't seen it. But Elsa, she's this cool ice queen. She has power. She can make anything freeze. I'm doing this because she does it out of her hands. Except the problem is, she doesn't know how to use that power wisely. She doesn't know how to control it. And it gets triggered when she gets emotional, scared, angry or upset. And it's only when she realises she's got other powers and other strengths that balance and harmony can be restored. Just like anything, too much of a good thing is not good for you. So through this process of looking at your blueprint, understanding your brilliance, understanding your blocks, and knowing how to find balance, I find my clients are no longer trying to be superheroes. They're just humans being super. So if you'd like to start thinking about this today, I'm just going to ask you one simple question to begin with. What did you want to be when you grew up? Thank you.